All right, welcome everybody. This is Paladin Walks into a bar. It's going to be a bit of a free-form panel here, and especially since of all the guys here, only one of us, the moderator, actually plays a paladin right now. So technically, I probably should be the only one who speaks. But in the interest of fairness, I'll at least let you guys do a brief introduction of yourselves, please.
I'm John Hartness. I'm the publisher of Falstaff Books, as well as writing a few things. And usually when I hang out with these guys, I play Fendigo the Fantastic on Offence podcast.
Boy, if that wasn't a perfect encapsulation of what this panel's talking about.
It's a pretty good
Is that the bard?
of our
He said that's the bard.
No, that's the barbarian.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Enthusiastic barbarian.
Oh,
John's the bard.
shouldn't you like roar as you run in? Okay.
So, yeah, hi. And just for the record, I'm still allowed to say praise Torag.
Praise Torag.
Hi, my name is Robert Bevan. I write the Caverns and Creatures series of comedy, fantasy novels and short stories. I guess, are we doing our A&D introductions? I play the role of Klaus Richter, notorious ROG.
Hi there, I'm Steve Wetherall. I'm the author of the Doomsday Journeys and other funny fantasy works, recently acquired by Falstaff Books. I'm also on the Authors and Dragons podcast, where I play Brandon Fymester, sexually attractive monk.
I am Drew Hayes, recent winner of the award of Too Drunk to Dance by Alcoholics Monthly, so pretty proud of that. Lesser things, I also write books, books like Superpowers, NPCs, Fred the Vampire Accountant, and of course Fortune Festus. Get through that quick. I do in A&D, I am the GM who tolerates all of them.
And just
Barely.
I'm Joseph Brassi. I was an author on the Mongoliad Project. I write fantasy stories, Skyfarer and Dragon Road. My 2 books are downstairs, which I, of course, fucking forgot. On the Authors and Dragons podcast, I play Bjork Bjornsson, enthusiastic and violent barbarian.
And we slowly move next. As the crowd moves to this side of the room.
I don't have problems with projection!
Oh my god.
If there's 2 people who don't need a mic, it's me and you.
Egomaniacal, introduction. I didn't actually say mine. My name is Rick Gualtieri. I'm also on the Author of Dragons podcast. I'm a horror fantasy comedy writer, and I also play the insane paladin Silas Kane on this. So I figure I'll lob a softball at you guys.
leave my balls alone.
No touching!
Notice I said softballs, not old balls.
Wait, I'm younger than you, fuck you.
Everyone's younger than
We do
him.
this every panel where I like you to do that until he remembers that I'm actually older than him. But all of us in some capacity or another, in case it's not painfully obvious, we all work in kind of like comedy, whether it's just as part of the podcast or what we write. So I figure I'll start off with an easy one, and let's start off at the end there.
Oh, sure, thanks.
What is your philosophy when it comes to comedy?
Oh dear God. So like humor is the is the great tension breaker, right? It's what makes like really dark stuff tolerable. But I think the other thing is that like humor requires vulnerability. Like for something to be genuinely funny, for a person to be genuinely funny, there has to be like an openness there. So like it's also one of the best ways to get people invested in your characters, because like if someone makes you laugh, you will want to be around them. You will want to spend time with them. And you will give a shit about what they have to say and all that crap. So that's kind of like where I exist with that vulnerability.
I think my philosophy for writing humor is basically I really like to have characters who have their own eccentricities and thoughts and ideas, and my favorite kind of humor is just rubbing them against each other and seeing how shit goes awry.
Many people in the audience immediately went to Johnny Three Dicks and rubbing things against each other.
Fortune Festival now.
Clammy hands, Edgar.
Oh yeah. But to echo Joe's point, I do agree. Like it's big emotions come from both sides of the spectrum, and I really like the ability to put a laugh into a serious scene because sometimes that happens. You can be in a fight with your significant other and somebody farts. Like life is chaotic and messy, and the ability to swirl those emotions together is, I think, part of what makes humor so fun.
I think my approach to comedy was put most succinctly by Monty Python, where the formula is, and it just applies to pretty much everything they do. Say something clever in a silly way, or say something silly in a clever way. That's pretty much it.
You know what's funny? Dicks.
Probably not much more that needs to be said there.
God damn it.
They are really funny looking.
So my philosophy towards comedy is similar to my philosophy towards picking up dates. Make them drink until I'm funny. The drunker you are, the more amusing and attractive I get. My wife has been blackout drunk for 23 years. It's the only way.
John, that's called death.
Ric Flair makes it different.
All right. Once again, if it's not painfully obvious, a lot of us delve into, I guess, what you would call adult humor. But
Many copies of Shingles available now.
But I mean, how about this? Is there anything in humor? We'll start, John, and move down this time. Is there anything in humor that you consider off limits, whether personally or as a whole?
There are things that there are jokes I won't make, yeah. I won't make jokes about rape and sexual assault, and I have yet to find someone who can make those things funny for me. There are people who find those jokes funny, and this isn't the panel where I judge those, that's later. But for me, those things, those are the things for me. I was about to say child abuse, and then I'm like, nope. I can make that shit funny. Yeah. I was like, nope. Put zombies in it, put teenagers in zombie apocalypse, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty fucking funny. So yeah, no, that's it for me. I don't find those things funny, and I haven't found anyone else yet who can make them funny for me.
I'm trying to find those boundaries and pass them.
At warp speed.
Yeah, I can't think of anything I've absolutely said no to. Yeah, I guess that's
I try not to tweet when I'm on Ambien.
The president of ABC appreciates that. As does your publisher.
My comedy was fairly light-hearted and whimsical until I met Robert Bevan, and now we're all on a terrible dark path for which there is no escape.
You're welcome.
So that's
This program is brought to you by Kirkland Lite.
A lot of comedy is kind of like building trust and a relationship with your audience, and it's kind of like, it is like a dark path. You go, hey, I'm going to go over here down this dark path. You want to come with me? I'll go with you, maybe they like it, maybe they don't. And then you go, maybe we go a bit further. And they come with you, maybe I like it, maybe I don't. And I think you can make a joke about anything. If the right comedian with the right audience doesn't have humor, is a commentary.
at the
It's
end of
not
that
necessarily
dark
an opinion.
path. At the end of that dark path is a windowless van.
I knew you were going there.
Being driven.
Holding a can of Kirk's. So I think John kind of touched on, in theory, you can make anything funny if you're willing to put in the time and care and consideration, and really choose your audience carefully. But those topics, generally, when you hit them, you're like, I'd rather just not. Or that's how I feel. It's like I could do all of that, or I could just not make that joke and make a different joke instead. And so I tend to go down those routes. Also because a lot of my humor is character interaction, a lot of it's just people fucking with one another, and that's a little more personal and less.
Yeah. I'm with John. I won't make rape jokes because I have never found any that I really thought were funny. Like it's kind of weird because one person's gallows humor is another person's horror. Like you hang out with like EMTs and medical types long enough, and like the humor gets incredibly black very quickly. So yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's just about knowing what you can do. Like they've said, vulnerability and being able to engage with something like in the kind of a trustworthy way is like at the heart of good comedy. So you have to be able to know like how you can maintain that trust and what topics you have to stay away from because you'll break it. And that's going to vary from person to person.
And I'd like to add, there's again about the trust with the audience. There's a comedian, Frankie Boyle. He's really edgy. I don't particularly like him. He goes to places that I think, again, I just don't want to follow. But he is an excellent comedian. And he made a joke. It was a tweet when you guys have the speaking clock over here. You ring up, and there's an old thing. We had something called the speaking clock. You rang up and it told you the time.
Oh, yeah.
And the guy who did
Tom.
it died. And Frankie Boyle, he made some kind of joke about dying after several small strokes. It was a clock joke. But it was it was just a tweet. But a reporter rang him up and said, we're talking to the family of that man who died, and he did die after a series of small strokes. So how do you think they're going to feel when I tell them that? And Frankie Boyle said, well, I wouldn't walk into this man's house, talk to his family. I wouldn't turn up at his funeral and make that joke. I wouldn't make that joke to his mother. It's kind of, you're the guy making the joke to him. And we get that now. It's kind of, somebody will be outraged by something and think, well, how would they feel if this was suddenly personal? But it wasn't supposed to be personal, and it never was supposed to be personal. So context is everything.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that up because it really plays well into my next question, which was that in this day and age of social media, especially when a Twitter mob can form in an instant, and here's the thing, anything that maybe you think funny can be somebody else's trigger item, and we live in a day and age where a joke you could have made in public, say in the 80s or 90s, if you even hint at it, you can be you can suddenly find yourself at the center of a media firestorm. So how do you deal with that in this day and age, or don't you, or just do you take that attitude of comedy sometimes involves being offended? Joe, let's start at your end this time.
Oh boy. I mean, part of it is that even on social media, like in theory, you're exposed to everyone, but you also have an audience. You have, the people who follow you. Like if you're on Twitter, for example, people who follow you generally know the sort of stuff you talk about, the sort of places you'll go. And if you have a good sense of that, then you generally know like what you can say and what things are gonna be received well. But I think a lot of it also just comes down to the phrase is the humor punching up or punching down is a big thing because making fun of people who are below you or who are suffering or whatever is usually not funny. Whereas there's a reason that the best satire uppercuts. But I think also just tone. Like the tone and the spirit in which you convey stuff like that matters because people will draw a lot from how you say something and the context of what you say. It's like context is everything.
To echo Joe, I was actually going to say one of my rules is I always take a look and say, okay, am I punching down? And if so, no.
Yeah.
Because that's just not a good policy to be in general, and it's certainly not going to look good on anybody. And then beyond that, I think if I'm making a joke on Twitter and it's going to be offensive, I'll usually make myself the butt of the joke. I'll talk about my crippling alcohol. See, it's funny because I'm the one getting shit on.
I had something I was going to say there, but now I'm distracted by Drew's crippling alcoholism.
You and me both, buddy.
Yeah, context everything, punching up, punching down, that's generally a good rule. Rules are meant to be bent and broken. Generally, I think if you can be sufficiently absurd about something that you are highlighting the absurdity of it, that's generally the kind of jokes I'll make. I don't think you have to necessarily be punching anyone, but you just point something out that's very silly, and if you find something silly, somebody can read into that and infer a political stance, but that's an inference. That's largely a decision that maybe you help them to arrive at, but they made. So, but I don't know. I mean, we do a fairly dicey podcast. We do an even dicier podcast, but for those of you that contribute to the Patreon. Oh God! And there are absolutely things in that I have said that if somebody took them out of context, and if I was
in context,
and if I was a worthwhile target for somebody, and they put it on Twitter and say, "Look what this man said, let's get him." They would absolutely get me.
And I would say on the podcast and like the bonus episodes, forget about punching up and down. I think we just close our eyes and take a swing. And standing there, they get dead. Windmill.
And Steve's just in the corner beating up the new Ghostbusters.
Going on what Steve said about, I'm drawing a blank. What did you say?
Kirkland Lite. Kirkland Lite.
Making things sufficiently absurd to, that how could you even begin to take this seriously? That was my aim with Space Puppies, which I thought about. That was one of those things I thought about a long time for, do I really want to write this? And then Drew said, Drew wants to wreck my career, so he said, yeah, write it.
For the record, Space Puppies, still one of my favorite books.
But yeah, I figured if I name my main character Duke White Power, people will understand.
Again, I mean, out of context. That sounds.
It does get a lot better
again,
with context.
it's not any better in context. So when we do the bonus episodes, what I consider our mark of success is how quickly after we start recording, I hear, "Oh my God," from Joe. Because he's from Seattle, so he's our measuring stick. So I know that we've nailed it when we're less than a minute in and we've already had Joe either say, "Oh my God," or "God damn it." Once we've made at least one of us regret associating with the other, we're good. So, yeah, but you do have to pay attention to the world you're in. What you said was really true. There are things that you could have said in a live stand-up routine 10 years ago, or on a panel at a con 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, that will wreck careers today. But as a public or semi-public or public indecency, you have to be aware of the world you live in, and there is a certain amount of context. If we had said, which I'm sure we did, if we had said horribly insensitive things 10, 15, 20 years ago, and I'm just assuming that since we continue to say those things today, we weren't suddenly better back in the past.
A little bit.
But we went together, so. But yeah, I think that you do get a little bit of a pass on the shit you said 10 years ago, or the shit you said when you were 17 and stupid, by saying, "I'm sorry, I was 17 and stupid." When we're 40-something and stupid, then you're just irreparably stupid.
I think often the difference really is if you say something and it's just a dumb thing and people are like, "Hey, that was a dumb thing," they'll generally be pretty forgiving if you're like, "You know what? Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry."
Well, that's something I've heard Shauna talk about several times this weekend on panels, is when people bring up things in her books that weren't problematic to her when she wrote them but are problematic today, she's like, "Yes, you're right. I'm sorry, and I'm trying to be better."
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's stuff in early Bubba stories that I wouldn't write today. And if you want to know what those are, the books are available downstairs at the Fall Falstaff Books table. You can buy them, and I'll highlight.
The highlighting is $5 extra.
You highlight a really good concept of things you said before versus things you said now. But there's also, I think, the concept of what do you say in public, and I'll say in writing, since that's what we do, versus there's also how you talk to like super close friends. So how about that? Is like, you know, and I don't mean curse words or so. Obviously, we've had a few F-bombs. I won't sully my lips with them.
That's the only thing you'll sell your lips with.
Embrace the fuck.
But I mean, from my perspective, it's what I find is interesting sometimes is, like for example, one of the quote unquote taboo words I would say is like I have 2 autistic children, but I've noticed that, like, you know, even though we don't prefer to hear the word retard, we really haven't stopped using it as necessarily a generic insult. You know, but the concept, but like I know in my case, that's more like, you know, close friends or so. You say, you know, that's not something you would blurt out in a workspace. And maybe, like, you know, and depending in a book, I might have put that in a book 5 years ago. I'm not sure if I would put that in a book now. So, say going back 5, maybe 10 years, how has that, like, you know, has your personal speech amongst close friends changed, and like, you know, has your writing speech changed to reflect that?
I try to use fucktard.
Yeah. I use fucktard a lot. Ass clown. My editor at Bellbridge, my copy editors hate me because the style guide for made-up curse words is 4 pages long. No, I just think that as society evolves and as we are members of society, our vocabulary evolves, and that, yes, there are things I say in chat to you idiots that I don't say on my public Facebook feed. The price of admission to that private chat is much higher. We'll come up with that Patreon tier later.
And there is definitely a liability waiver before you get into it.
And an NDA.
A lot of it comes down to the safety of the space, and you're freer and more honest when you're with your friends, whether it's the comedy that you're using or the openness about other real life things. It's kind of, for me, it's kind of the same thing. When I'm with my close friends and willing to be pretty much completely open and honest, it's very different from when it's a different type of stupid than the type of stupid I portray here on panels.
I want to know how much the Patreon tier is for the stuff when Drew says, "Jesus, Bevan, you cut that out."
Which is usually right after Joe says, "God damn it."
If we get 3 goddammits in 2 minutes, that usually leads to, okay, Ian, you got to cut all that.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of, I guess, a slight hypocrisy to it sometimes, where we congratulate ourselves for using the correct words to be an offensive prick. But I was watching Preacher season 2. I really loved it. I thought it was great. But one of the cracks was, spoiler alert, they find the descendant of Christ and he's severely mentally challenged, like peeing on people mentally challenged. So right there, you're playing a disability for laughs. You are being sacrilegious for laughs, but he never once used the word retard. And I thought, you're still doing all these offensive things. You're just not using the word that no one likes. So, but I actually, it may surprise some of you to know I hate offending people. If I think I've offended someone, it eats me up. I hate it. But there has to be a kind of, I guess, if you're going into this zone of comedy where you're trying things out, you know, somebody makes 1,000 Twitter jokes and they make one that they get crucified for. Maybe, in some cases, you know, it's their own fault, but maybe sometimes it's kind of our fault.
So the subject of evolving language is an interesting one for me. I'm from a very small town in Texas, is where I grew up most of my life. And it was not necessarily an overtly racist place to live. I mean, not around the people that my family surrounded
So
me
not
with.
like here. Full disclosure, I've lived here for 25 years. I get to talk shit about this city.
It was a few towns over was worse, but like, you know, my parents were good parents. They kept me around people who weren't complete assholes. But it was interesting to me growing up because a lot of just little words and expressions we used, I never clicked to, oh shit, you can't say that. like when we would sit down, like cross-legged as kids, I'd be like, okay, everybody sit down Indian style. Just be like, and looking back, I'm like, ooh, that's probably not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recently just found out the word gypsy was a slur. I didn't know that until a few years ago. I genuinely didn't. And so that's an interesting one for me because I'll sometimes find out I've done something and I have to genuinely apologize. But coming from a place of ignorance, I feel like it's different from a place of intentionality.
Yeah.
And as someone who had to like go through the coming out of a very small town and learning like colloquialisms that were not okay, I feel like it's a little bit, it's different. So intentionality, I wouldn't say I've probably changed my language that much, but I've definitely updated my language as I have learned more about people and the world and what's a respectful way to talk to them.
Yeah, I'm in a lot of the same place that Drew is, but so like a lot of that stuff's kind of already been said. That as you learn what upsets people and like there's a difference between someone being ruffled versus someone being like really viscerally upset by something you've said, and I think it's really not that hard to just to like moderate how you talk and to correct those terms. But like for example, using insults, like it's weird. My use of like specific problem words like retard has like dropped gone, but at the same time I've started using basic profanity a lot more. Like my favorite insult right now is turd gargling fascist fuck muppet.
Wait, say it again, I missed half of that.
Turd gargling fascist fuck muppet.
Somebody edit that. I want that for my ringtone.
On video.
Want a t-shirt.
That's going to be the stinger at the end of an episode.
Yeah.
Just to expand on what Joe was saying, and saying there about learning to kind of moderate the words you use, and I generally don't use problem words. I might just accidentally use one, but
Yeah, English, we don't know what you're saying.
you guys will just think I'm being whimsical. No, but there is this evolving environment, and it's been massively sped up by the internet. And, we're all pre-internet guys, and there's going to be a learning process. I think that it kind of needs to be a space for forgiveness of that, and just kind of maybe, it's definitely a conversation that needs to be happening, but it needs to be a conversation. It doesn't need to be a lynch mob.
I get through this by just writing genuinely bad people characters. So, they say bad things that they're supposed to.
All right, well, I have two more questions, then we're going to open it up to you guys. And let me just say, you better be good. And I don't mean good as in well-behaved. I mean good as in, like, come on, hit us. Give us something. All right, so obviously, so John and Drew, you both touched upon this, but let's be honest. We're a panel of white guys sitting up here. Ethnic humor,
diversity?
Ethnic humor or nationalistic humor, okay or not? Who did we start last time?
Started down there.
All right, we'll start with you then, Joe.
It depends on where you're standing. I mean, anyone who follows me on Twitter knows that I'm on like a 24/7 hate rant at fascists. So like, also like via that punching up thing, I'm way more comfortable taking swings at my own culture and at like myself and my own country than I am at like others, because I don't know them. I don't know their problems. I don't know, there's so much much capacity for like doing damage or at least I should say doing damage to innocent people rather than doing damage to bad people, which I'm totally fine with. I generally stay away from ethnic humor unless it's making fun of my own ethnicity. And I'm just generally okay with punching nationalism in the teeth.
I have, I guess, a little trouble. Obviously, I default to standard white guy. But if you look, obviously, I'm not entirely that. I come from a very, very, very mixed background. I think I showed them, I did a genetic test recently, and it's just the map. Except Australia. And that's not hyperbole. It's
just weird.
All my ancestors had a thing for foreigners. Every last one. So the cross-section of that is I've never really had, like, even though I have all these ethnic connections running back through my family line, I've never actually had any connection to that. And so even though, in some capacities I probably could, I never would because I don't feel like that is my culture, that I have the right to do that.
That's a bit of a scary thing if you think about it, where if you were to take every race and every nationality on Earth and crossbreed them, you end up with Drew.
Dear God.
He is the Earl
Look upon me in despair.
You broke, John.
Yeah. Well, the good news is the new mixed, perfect, everybody in race will be very tall.
And drunk.
Yeah, I think a good example, as John earlier said, how racist this place is. But then he said, hey, I've been here for 25 years. And it's kind of about, do you have the right to say something, you know? Have you earned the right, whether through education or just through your natural circumstances? In England, at the moment, there's kind of, we get a lot of Christians who say, all right, you'll take a swing at my religion, but you won't touch Islam, you're too afraid to do that. And it's kind of, they've got a point, but at the same time, most, obviously, English comedians are, English comedians, they're not, we're mostly atheists. But most of us grew up with kind of small C Christianity. And it's kind of, so, I understand that, and I grew up in that. So I can confidently, should I wish to, confidently take a swing at Christianity, specifically small C English Christianity, if I wanted to. I don't really know that much about Islam. I didn't grow up Muslim, I didn't grow up with many Muslims, so A, why would I? And B, why should I? I don't have the right to do that.
That's a great point. Being in a system often exposes you to the hypocrisies and problems within that system, so it allows you to be capable of taking it down more insightfully.
And I'll let you know where the soft underbelly is.
And also your audience. It's like, I don't know much about this. I don't know much about this group, and neither do you.
Well, like I was talking before about space puppies with Duke White Power, as long as people understand that he is a horrible person, the terrible things he says, are meant to highlight that, and that's the joke, not what he says, but that is exposing his own ignorance, and that's like my career.
No, but I agree. I think that by using that hyperbole and exaggerating a character's view of another group, using that to highlight the stupid of the character is pretty acceptable. They've covered most of whether or not it's okay to do it, and the answer is yeah, kinda, but. But that's the answer with almost every writing question is, yeah, kinda, but maybe this time stand on your head and hold your tongue just right, and that's how you find the cloaca.
If that made no sense to you, I'd like to invite you all to the Authors and Dragons show at 7 p.m. tonight. I guarantee you, it will.
I'll do this for them. A cloacal kiss.
No!
As I say, Bob and I think we have the same issues. We write characters. We write characters that essentially mock a certain style, but depending on your viewpoint of reading it, in some cases you might you might look at it and be like, okay, obviously you're kind of like okay with this, but it's sarcasm. Sometimes sarcasm is like hard. It's hard to grasp. But okay, so I have one more question. Then we're going to open it up to you guys. And Steve, you kind of already answered this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. We'll start with John. Okay. Offending people. Do you care if you offend people? Like, how does it really affect you?
So I'm going to approach offending people in slightly different ways than the rest of the panel because I'm not only myself, but I'm also every author who writes for me. So yes, it does affect me, and I do pay attention to it. I have to take a look at the person who. One, I look at what I said and did I fuck up? And if I do, absolutely it bothers me and I apologize. And I, like Steve said, I feel terrible about it because I want to make people laugh, I want to make people feel good, or I want to make them weep and feel horrible, depending on the book. But I don't want to be hurtful and I don't want to punch down and make people feel lesser. So yes, I do pay attention to that, but I also sometimes find that people are looking for an excuse to be offended, and if that's the case, then my go fuck yourself reflex kicks in real fast. And then I have to decide whether it's worth it to let that reign free, or if it's going to do more long-term harm to myself, my company, and my authors. So I do pay a lot more attention than I did 5 years ago when it was just when my decisions affected just me.
For me, it depends on who I offend and why or how, perhaps. If somebody.
That was not a fart. That was the Taco Bell run is later.
Thunder fart.
That was this morning.
If I say something to offend good people or whatever, which I don't find happens all that often. Some people just don't get satire, and I feel bad, and well, not much, but if it's just some dumb asshole, then I feel pretty good about it.
Don't like offending people. I think I really enjoy doing our podcast, and I thought anybody was listening to that, and there's a good chance that they could like everything, but one thing could offend them. That would make me feel bad, but it's kind of, it's collateral. We're telling a lot of dicey jokes. Not everyone's going to not be offended. So, I guess I never go out of my way to offend people. Most of my jokes are pretty absurd, but I do like to, like most comedians, I'm a deeply bitter and angry man. So, occasionally, I'll see hypocrisy on the internet, and I'll make what I think is a biting satirical remark. I think, was that worth it? Was it worth kind of getting the claws out there?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is worth it. And without the ability to take risks like that, why have comedians?
Sometimes it is worth it. That sort of dovetails nicely into mine. So, piling on to the earlier one about growing up with and learning that you were kind of ignorant in a lot of ways in terms of like interacting with people of different races and cultures. If I offend someone by accident due to ignorance, I am very sorry, and that is not intentional. And of course, I will apologize because that was never my intent. Now, if I'm intending to offend a certain group of people, I'm not sorry at all. I'll use this as a great example. You got it. So there's a small character in here called the Whitest Knight who flies around in superpowered Klansman armor. And everybody in the book shits on him relentlessly. Everybody hates him. It was sort of the flip side of the Captain America, plant yourself by the river of truth and say, no, you move. That only works because that's Captain America. If some asshole takes his feet in on racism, he's just an asshole. And so that was sort of my point.
I think you mean when.
So when I wrote the Whitest Knight, I was like, yeah, this is going to piss some people off. Good. I don't want those fucking people around me.
Basically, if I unintentionally hurt someone, especially if they're someone innocent, then obviously I feel bad because I never intended to like cause harm to good people, especially vulnerable people. But I also like taking swings at fascism. So, like, on the other hand, it's like, you know what? If it's like they said earlier, it depends on who's offended. It depends on who's offended and why they're offended. And if they have a like white power flag as their Facebook profile, and they're coming at me going like, "This thing you wrote pissed me off," I'm like, line forms to the left, asshole.
And I'm telling you, if you're to the left, a joke.
All right, guys, we've got about 10 minutes left. I would love to hear your thoughts. So you're going to go first, sir.
So when it comes to using stereotypes in your writing, do you find or have a preference for subverting them to find humor, or really leaning into?
Lean in hard.
Both at times. It sort of depends. Like if it's like a person or culture. Like I had ghosts from like different eras, and like one was from the '60s, and so he just smoked a shitload of weed, and one was from the '80s, and he was drunk and made fun of stuff. And but then you also have ones that kind of flip things on their head. So it really is contextual to what best serves the character in the scene.
Yeah, I'm willing to do either. A lot of my stuff is built on the old comedic tropes of funny fat guy, tall skinny guy is the straight man, and the fat guy kind of bumbles through, or maybe the fat guy's the smart one and the skinny one's supposed to be the smart one, but he's the idiot. I play with a lot of those old style comic tropes, and as far as stereotypes, if it's a stereotype that is frequently hurtful, I'll try to subvert it. If it's a stereotype that is less hurtful, if it's a giant fat redneck, okay, I'm going to use that because I'm a giant fat redneck. So I know all of those stereotypes. And we kind of get off pretty easy, except for country music. We're stuck with that.
So my rule of thumb is basically if you're gonna imply something, right? If you're gonna create reader expectations and you're planning on subverting that, the rule of thumb for me is that whatever you're subverting it with has to be better than what they were expecting. I think that's probably a good rule of both comedy and drama.
Okay, here's the other one that offends people. When is it okay to kill the dog? And which one of you do you think could do it the funniest?
Bevan, definitely Bevan.
I will just say, I killed the dog, and I did do it for a joke.
Yeah.
When it's acceptable to kill the dog is when you're trying to mock the people who get upset, specifically upset about the dog being killed. That's the only time I do it. It's like, I don't mind when a whole village of children gets wiped out in a movie, but then they killed the dog.
Yeah.
I might make fun of you. I might just kill a dog to spite you.
Yeah, I had someone come after me because in Queen of Cats, I blow up a wagon. I needed to blow up the gate to a castle, so I used a wagon full of explosives. And somebody's like, "Oh my God, those poor horses." I'm like, "I never even fucking mentioned horses."
Please tell me you sent them critical failures.
You literally for all you know, the wagon was empty and they rolled it to the goddamn gate. And let me introduce you to my friend Bob. Jesus Christ.
I think a more important aspect to that is that if you step back, we didn't kill anything. It was a fictional horse or a fictional dog. It never existed.
I was proud of this world I made this horse.
It's really hard to be cruel to an animal that does not. Oh look, here's a fictional dog. Oof, nothing's hurt there.
How could you kill the dog?
I'm going to say it appears we've angered God, so maybe take all of this with a grain of salt.
Is there an interior hallway, something with no windows? Because we may all die.
While we're offending God, who has something that'll take it all away? One second.
What do you guys think about in-jokes? Like, it's really easy to have, that joke for your group of friends that's hysterical, but then you tell it and everybody, the surrounding area just stares at you and asks what the hell you're talking about. Like,
Comedy also depends on a common frame of reference.
I mean, you can build an in-joke within the world. You can incorporate it, but you can't just like throw it in and expect it to be funny. It's in-jokes between characters are great. You can build running themes. I mean, Arrested Development's a great example of that. But you know,
I know, right?
You shouldn't have killed the dog.
readers should always know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Always be clear, and that's true in any genre. So if you haven't clearly set up why this should be funny, they're not going to think it's funny.
Horse butchery. Hilarious. Establishing it as an in-joke makes it even funnier.
I killed a horse once, and like it was like several people like who read the manga were like, "That is the saddest scene in all 3 books," and I'm like, "Holy crap, you're okay with a lot of really horrible shit." but there's also a little. It's weird. Like so many people are like, "This is such a sad scene," and I'm like, "Yeah, but I can't think about it without laughing because I spent 3 hours looking up various forms of horse euthanasia." Like I know so many ways to kill a horse now.
you're beating a dead horse.
Disappear, the spell ends.
It's more like I'm trying over and over again and it's not working.
I think it's important to distinguish between Easter eggs and in-jokes because there are Easter eggs that you can throw out to common readers or readers. I reference Caverns and Creatures in the new Bubba novella that's coming out. I make some smart ass remark like, "What the fuck do you think this is, a Caverns and Creatures game?" And that's just anybody reading it who's never listened to us or read Critical Failures will get that I'm referencing a role-playing game that may or may not have been created by Gary Gygax in the 70s. But everyone who does follow us gets a little extra boost. They get a little extra giggle out of it. And I like Easter eggs, and and I try to avoid in-jokes.
It's Larry in my life.
Very well.
Larry Lawrence.
Okay. So, going on with the idea of jokes of the past, what is the worst thing you've joked about in a book, and how do you feel about it now?
That's a high fucking bar, dude.
Or a really low bar.
Same thing.
Most of us some of us have like over a dozen books. You're asking us to like remember every word we've written.
No. But the thing you look back and go, I can't believe I wrote that.
Space Puppies, and I feel great about it.
Nothing. I can't think of anything in my books that I wouldn't stand behind because if I felt like it needed changing, I would change it.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I don't think I've done anything that is so grievously offensive that it warrants going back and being like, oh my god. I mean, maybe I've offended the literary gods to that degree, but not like with the subject matter or the joke.
I was going to say, if it wasn't right for the character or for the story, then I should have released it to begin with. And even if it is reprehensible, it was right for the story, and I will defend it as right for the story.
Yeah, most of my earlier stuff's not really that offensive, but we have only just started the Shingles short story. It's still time. That's in its infancy. We may not be here next year. We may all be in prison.
I've never I haven't written anything that made me go like oh I shouldn't have written that. But I've had lines that are maybe like the darkest or the most disturbing thing I've ever written. I think I wrote a line in Skyfarer where someone says, "We will have a reckoning if I have to lay your well-fucked skull at the seat of our masters."
That's kind of awesome.
And in retrospect, I was like, "Oh, that was kind of no, that worked." That's it did say that.
Solid.
Where's the dark bit of that?
Yeah. All right. One last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Nathan, I know you've had your hand up for a while.
Well, about the killing of the animal thing, life and death is part of everything. But what I want to know is why nobody has said anything about Rick using a vampire to molest a Bigfoot. What?
Was it funny for the Bigfoot? Right? Sasquatch. What the fuck, dude? I mean, Sasquatch.
Joe, I think you know what you have to say to bring us out.
God damn it!
There it is.
Thank you, London. 7 o'clock tonight, we'll be in the Lakeview room doing even stupider shit with our special opening act, Mikey Mason.